Hi everyone, welcome to the Catharsis Intro Animation Breakdown. I'm Jillian, I play Lilith Blackwood. I also do a lot of the graphic design work for the campaign as well as take notes. I'm the official lore keeper. So today I'm here to show all of you my workflow, my process, a little behind the scenes peek at the animated intro I created for the YouTube upload versions of Catharsis. This was kind of a spur of the moment ADHD idea that started with me thinking about how to not only engage with our audience, but also as a chance to showcase all the incredible art that our group has collectively made over the course of the past 1.5 years since this campaign started. And there's a lot of art, there's over 200 pieces of it, and a lot of it is included here, a lot of it isn't. But I wanted to really showcase just our passion and our love for this campaign that has really changed our lives in really amazing and wonderful ways. So with that out of the way, let's dive right into things. So starting off here, we've got my layers in After Effects. You can see here all the materials I've got. And so basically, you can kind of break down the structure of this intro into 3 parts. You've got this opening clip here, the castle. You've got the 4 character animations, and I'll go over how I did those in just a moment. And then you've got this kind of MCU style slideshow of all the art we've done, and then end on the logo. So there's a lot happening here, so I'm just going to dive right in. And we'll start with Paris. I'm going to click on this. So each of these character animations is essentially made up of 3 parts. You've got 2 pre-compositions, and pre-compositions, for those who aren't familiar with After Effects, are basically just a bunch of layers that are then made into one big layer, and then you can manipulate that one big layer and do additional things with it. There's 2 of them. There's one for this background here, and then there's one for the character animation here. Then you've got a couple overlays, and you've got a camera. So I'm going to start by diving into the character animation. So here we got both Paris and Poppy. And the way that I animated these characters is pretty consistent for everybody. I use the puppet tool in After Effects, which is super useful when animating any sort of 2D art that you can't easily split apart into layers. And essentially with the puppet tool, you create various points. I think of them almost like as joints. There are points where you can distort a bit like this, or you can kind of do that, or you can rotate them. It depends on the kind of pin that you use. And these pins also serve as anchor points, which means that things aren't going to move around the pin. So as you can see, I'm moving Paris's head here, and no matter what, these shoulders are staying still. So what I do here is I manipulate the pins over the timeline, and then Paris's head bobs up and down to give it that sort of smooth, kind of lifelike, just this energy, this nice lifelike energy. Poppy does not have any of those pinpoints. I would have added them, but the art I had of Poppy did not have additional keyframes for the wings, and it would have looked off if I had made them flap. So instead, I just have Poppy animating on a path with some nice keyframes. And you'll notice there's a bit of rotation here too on these character models, specifically to make them feel a little more lifelike. Because when you're living, when you're breathing, you're not just standing ramrod straight. You're gesturing a lot, and so I wanted to reflect that, especially for characters who have a lot of life and personality like Paris. So if we go back in here, the next part of this, and this is true for all the character intros, is the backgrounds. Each character has a different collage background. So this is the one for Paris. This is the one for Ellie. This is the one for Gwilla. And this is the one for Lilith. You only see a little bit of each of these in the final clips, but I made them all a bit larger, so that way there's no blank spaces where you'll see past the camera. And what I'm doing with this collage here, if you go in, and you see here, let me change the view actually a little bit so you can actually see better what I'm doing. There. You can see here that the camera is essentially moving, which basically means that this entire thing is happening in a 3D space. And that gives it that nice gradual movement in a way that wouldn't necessarily be possible if I just manipulated a layer alone. When you combine those together and you add a little overlay here, let me do that. You add this little overlay here, and then you add this little overlay here, combine that all together, And you've got the final composition. So now we'll move on to Ellie. And again, I won't spend as long diving deep into these as I did with Paris because the principles of this is all the same. Again, if we look at Ellie's character animation here, we can see the pin locations. Right here, all the pins. We've got a pin here specifically for the arm. And then we got a couple of rotation pins here for the tail. Not that one. This one here is for the tail. And then these yellow pins are all to make sure that the surrounding areas where the animation is happening isn't affected in any major way. And then again, same here, you've got this background and whatnot. And the direction that the backgrounds are moving, I tried to make a little bit different for every character just to keep things interesting. Same is true for the directions of the characters. Paris moves from left to right, Ellie moves from right to left, and then the same pattern repeats for Gwilla and Lilith. As my film professors always said, it's all about making collisions and connections with different elements of the frame and between shots. Next up is Gwilla. And again, same principles here. I'll just quickly go over what I did for Gwilla. You've got the puppet tool here, and you've got, again, more points. There's a couple of parts of Gwilla that were cut out, specifically this part right here was cut from the final piece, not because I cut it necessarily, but because it's cropped out when you do the full animation. Then finally, we get to the trickiest animation rig by far, and ironically enough, it was for my own character. So here's Lilith, and I'll go into a little detail about what I did here with Lilith specifically. There we go. There. So what made Lilith a bit trickier than the other characters was the fact that there's actually two separate things happening here. Because we have a mask layer, essentially this splits the image in two. You've got one for the flame, which is animated separately from the body. And if you look at the flame specifically, it's got a wave warp effect. I could have used the puppet tool, technically, I suppose, on the flame, but in my experience, it wouldn't have looked as nice. The puppet tool isn't necessarily super great for doing like organic movements like flames or wind or water effects. So the wave warp tool is super helpful for that. And you can see here how that looks. The issue with the wave tool is that it affects the entire image, essentially. So you have to mask out the parts that you want to affect, and then the rest can just be normal. So it took a lot of trial and error to figure out how to make that work and still have the cohesive image. What also made this challenging was the fact that Lilith's movements, due to her pose, were going to be a little bit more robotic than the rest. So it was a big challenge to make that arm movement not look like an animatronic where it just goes boop, 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 and just goes up and then stays in place and then nothing else happens. So to fix that, I went ahead and I made sure that this part here was straight for the entire part to make sure it didn't look like her arm was broken. And then after the initial animation completes, I then start a new animation where it goes back down just a tiny bit and her wrist kind of flexes out as well, just to give a little more life, like she's igniting it. And then her head also tilts a bit. What I really love and what I'm sad you can't really see in the final piece is the animation on her coat, specifically these ruffles here. I think it looks so lovely, and I'm kind of bummed that it's not really visible in the final product. So that's basically the basic animation breakdown for these characters. The other thing I did was I added a drop shadow onto each of these character rigs, specifically because they stand out a lot more this way. And then the other thing I did for all of these was I added a tint to the collages to kind of make them the signature colors for each character. So for Paris, it's orange, Ellie, it's purple, Gwilla is green, and then Lilith is kind of like a bluish purple indigo, I guess. So now we've gone through all of that, I know that was a lot. Let's now go into the next part of this, my next step, which was, of course, this animation here. Like the other animations, there's kind of two things happening here. There's a single pre-comp here, which is just the images. There's, I think, 42 total, each one lasting maybe around 8 frames, which is less than half a second. For those who don't know, the typical frame rate for a lot of things is 23.976, rounded up to 24. So 8 frames is about a third of a second. And there's a little overlap here. If you go through frame by frame, you can see that I resized all these images to 1920 by 1080 to match the composition size, make sure there were no gaps or anything. I added a little motion blur as well, and they just kind of keep going and keep going and keep going. And it was really fun to go through all of these because, again, we've created so much art. I think Marina's created like 72 NPC portraits alone. So it was really cool to be able to look back on them and do stuff. And the last two images were very purposeful. I wanted to end strong. And so I decided that I wanted this to be the second to last one, this illustration that Zoe did of Zephyr and Prospera and Happier Times. Because at the end of the day, this is a story about relationships, both good relationships and toxic relationships, relationships that are falling apart, and people who are falling apart because their relationships have kind of failed and things aren't going great. And I think there's very few characters whose relationship I think is as pivotal to the story as the relationship between these two. A lot of machinations are happening because of Zephyr's stuff and how he wants to help his sister through some very dubious means. And then, of course, we end with this image, which I did a while back, of the protagonists and their love interests, Atticus, Wick, Archive, and Kay. So that whole sequence lasts around 11 and a half seconds, I think, all things considered. So then what I did was, again, you got the camera here. And let me switch to another camera view just so you can see what I'm doing here. There we go. Again, you can see here with the camera, it's pulling out, and it's also rotating a bit. And you can really see the rotation happen if you look at this boundary here. You can see that it's going and going and going. And then you've got this glitch overlay that I found on YouTube and just inserted it in. It's royalty-free. I love royalty-free stuff. I also love the glitch aesthetic. It's something that I've been doing since my earliest college projects when I was getting my film degree. And it's kind of a nice callback to that and to how pivotal a time that was in helping to hone my artistic identity. So now that all that's been assembled, it's time to go through the final step of this whole process, which is, of course, all the compositing, which is essentially just bringing it all together, adding little effects here and there, and just really making this all pop. And the one thing I really wanted to do was have some really cool transitions, because without the transitions, I mean, it looks okay, but it's just kind of, it's just kind of meh. Like, it's cool, but it doesn't have the wow factor. So what I did was I knew that there were a few motifs I needed. I needed something green because that's kind of the color of the curse, the fog, but also it's the color that I associate heavily with Gwilla and the Wild Mother and the Archfey. I knew I needed ravens because, of course, the Raven Queen is such a pivotal character in the story, and the ravens also work nicely with Paris specifically. Because they're so associated with corvids in general, like Poppy. And I also, of course, needed the blue butterflies to represent Lilith and Zephyr and the Archfey as a whole. YouTube was beyond helpful here. I was able to find some public domain / royalty-free footage of the things I needed. So those overlays were originally on green screen. You can see here. And I just grabbed the bits I liked best. I love this one specifically. And from that point, I basically just used a chroma key to knock out the green. And then I added a blend mode, a hard light specifically, to make it a little bit more seamless. This is what it looks like normal specifically. And you can kind of see, especially here in motion, that it kind of looks a little fake, if you know what I mean. So it was just a matter of making it look kind of seamless, almost collage-like, almost like a scrapbook. The next step was adding in the lens flares. Again, I used blend modes for that. This is what it looks like without the blend mode. You got the black here. So basically what I did was I just used a screen blend mode to knock out the black and have it be just the colors that I need. And then you've got this big burst of butterflies here, which I found by happenstance. I was scrubbing through the footage and I saw that. I was like, wow, that looks super cool. Let's have that be the final punctuation point when that chord hits and it goes into the final section of the intro, both the music and the animation itself. And then the final piece of this was having a really powerful, solid opening intro image. So for that, I went to some stock footage sites, specifically pexels.com. And that is where I found an image, or actually it was a video, of a German castle. And originally it wasn't great. It was this kind of ugly color. So I went in and I did a tint effect, specifically mapping the blacks to this purplish color and the whites to this kind of minty green color, so it would match the ending card, which was also stock image I got from Pexels, I believe, or it was on Splash. It was one of the two. Finally, to finish it all off, I grabbed some fog overlays and I just layered those on top of each other. I've made both those screen. That's what they look like originally. And that's the breakdown of this animated intro. All in all, it took around, I'd say, 16 hours total for this 30-second piece. Um, but it was a lot of fun, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed making it. Thanks for watching.